to another Meet Ben. We're super psyched to be here again. This was really an idea that Tom generated, I don't know, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and you know, we've been doing these Meet Ben sessions since. And the idea behind Meet Ben is to provide burgeoning entrepreneurs or already entrepreneurs who want to do the next level of cool stuff in their career and their business, and then get them connected with great guest presenters, experts in their field like Greg, who will talk about himself in just a second. So I'm Brian Slay with Ben Franklin. Thanks so much for being here. Greg, it's all yours.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks everybody for coming out. I'm glad to get a chance to meet each of you. And hopefully tonight will be a really interactive session. It's not a big group, right? Nobody needs to like raise a hand, wait till the end, nothing like that. So if you've got questions along the way, please by all means stop. Hi, I'm Greg.
I'm really sorry for being late. The weather was.
Your name's not really sorry though, is it?
No, it is not. I'm Mark. Nice to meet you.
Mark, nice to meet you. Brian reached out and said, would you come out and talk to folks about sales process? And I was like, you called the right guy. Because my backstory is, I started my career as an engineer. And much to my wife's chagrin, in 1989, I became seduced by the dark side of sales and marketing. But here's the thing. What engineers do ought to be the same thing salespeople do. And that's 4 simple words. Diagnose problems, prescribe solutions. If you can do that, if you can find the problems that exist in the marketplace that aren't being solved or being solved very well, and you are authentic about wanting to help people to find the solution to those problems, and that solution is yours, I like your chances. I like your chances a lot. So what I'm going to do tonight is share with you what it means to think about a sales process. And this is the engineer that still lives in the back of my head. It says, okay, if we're going to do something, we need a way to do it. Got to have some kind of a process to follow. Doesn't mean it never changes. Doesn't mean it's always going to be right. But you got to start somewhere, right? And the way I think about process is pretty simple. Like I said, it's a defined set of steps. Gives you a place to start. And why do you need a sales process? The answers are on the board. It gives you a way to forecast sales. Because if you have a good sales process defined, it's going to take you through basically checklists. How do I know a deal's at 25% versus 50%? It should be very specific, measurable steps that require that you know where you're at with that decision maker to get to 50%. And if you don't have them, then you're still at 25. And we're going to talk about that in some more detail later. It really is a way to talk about deals. Number 3 there is one of my favorites. Everybody's got the same language. Now in a small organization, you might just be talking to yourself. But once the business starts to grow, classic example I give is sales meetings I've been in my career. I've been doing this for 35 years. It's all B2B, and it's mostly technology oriented. Sales meetings, salespeople will say, Nate, don't worry, you're my sales manager. Don't worry about this, I got this. It's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. How do I know if I don't have a sales process that says, you know all these things that got you to 50%. To get to 100, you still have these things you still need to know. And so now we have a common language, and we talk about deals and forecasts. More importantly, perhaps, is that forecast now becomes credible over time. So if you tell your investors, or you tell your board, or even tell yourself, I've got $500,000 in my funnel for first quarter. Well, that's all the deals added up. If you don't have a forecast and a process that weights it, then you think you've got $500,000 of business. But if you're not taking into account just how confident you are about each of those deals, you might only have $150,000. So we'll talk some more about that too as we go through this. How do you get to there we go. How do you get to a sales process? I look at things pretty simply, and I boil this down to 3 big questions. And that is, who do I talk to? What do I say? And why should they care? Those are the big three questions. If you can answer those questions for yourself, and eventually for salespeople, you'll stay focused, you'll stay more productive, and you'll be more confident about where your business is going. So far, so good. Trust me, I can talk for 45 minutes. If you guys don't say anything, that's what it's going to be. So let's look at these big questions. Question one, who do I talk to? Some of this you maybe have already figured out. Some of this you may have partially figured out. Some of this you maybe haven't thought about yet. But the way I think about it is you have to know how you're going to segment your market. And market segmentation is a fairly well understood idea. It's like, okay, so what industries are the best ones for me? What company sizes are the best kind for me? But there can be a lot more to things just like industry, employee size, revenue size. There can be other characteristics that go into it too. Who do they serve? And what impact can you have on how they service their customers? Do publicly traded companies make better prospects for you than privately held companies? And by the way, when you guys will get this PDF, I'm sure, I have a link out to a template that you can use to start answering these questions and fill these things out. Okay. What I think really starts to define where your efforts should go is with buyer types. What I mean by that is, has anybody ever read the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore? This book's like 35 years old, you should still read it. It breaks down markets into what I think are eminently understandable buyer types. Starts with innovators. Picture a sine curve. Everybody know what a bell curve looks like? Sorry, bell curve, not a sine curve, right? So you're a small organization, you're a startup, you're trying to figure out how am I going to really get this business to grow. The first thing I'm going to do is talk to Amazon and Facebook and Google. They're my target market. Well, I'm rooting for you. But when it comes to matching up who the buyer types are within that market that you have defined as your target market, as a small company, you need people who are risk takers, who are visionaries and innovators, people who are willing to talk to you and say, is it Mark?
Yes, sir.
Mark, what do you do, Mark? What's your business?
Manufacture fall protection equipment for hunters and tree stands. It's elevated hunting solutions.
That's a great elevator pitch, or at least definition for me. Because now I know you don't sell car parts and you don't sell, minerals for making car batteries or whatever. So those people who are worried about falling out of tree stands and hurting themselves, that's your target market, right? If you had two kinds of buyers to choose from, one that never takes any kind of risks, doesn't maybe even go up in a tree stand very often, unless there's steps and a railing, they're not going up, right? The other one is using the backpack tree stand, climbing the tree themselves, setting it up. Who do you like better as your customer?
I like the uneducated one that I get to educate because I've got the solution that they don't know they need.
So the one who needs you more is the one who is more at risk. Maybe doesn't even know it, but is willing to take that risk versus the guy who's already going up a set of steps. Right? So buyer types are important to think about when you think about who am I going to talk to? And once you've defined again who that market segment looks like, what are some of the characteristics of the organizations, now you got to find people who are willing to talk to you. And my experience has been that, again, referring back to Jeffrey Moore in his book, Crossing the Chasm, he talks about innovators as that first little slice of the marketplace where you will be best received versus the early adopters, versus the early majority market where the big money is. And he calls his book Crossing the Chasm because there's a big gap you got to jump over to get into that early majority market where the majority of customers are. And it's hard to get there if you don't go through and establish yourself, build your brand, drive some revenues, with the innovators and the early adopters first. My own advice is don't shy away from being an entrepreneur. Don't shy away from being an early stage company. Be truthful about who you are, and you'll earn people's trust and their confidence far more than pretending that you're something that you're not yet. You might be someday, but you're not yet. So buyer types are really important, and the way to figure out how to get them to respond is think about all the things that you do that bring value to the customer. Think about it in their terms. The temptation will be list all your features and benefits. You start there. That's a good start. It's a real good start. Everything that you do, either you or as a service provider, as a product, list it out. And then think about what's the value that the buyer gets from that feature or that aspect of your service or product. Put it in their terms. And then think about, would this appeal to somebody who is looking for an edge? Somebody who's willing to take a risk. When I say take a risk, I don't mean a foolish risk. I mean a well-informed risk. And that's where you come in. Because if you can think about all the things that you do or that your product does, you can think about now turning that into statements of value for your customer, value mapping. Those are the things you want to talk about. It's tempting. Trust me, I know, I've done this. Tempting to list all the things you can do. I got my first conversation with Bradley. He picked up the phone. I'm going to tell him everything I do, everything my product does. Bradley doesn't care. You know what Bradley cares about? Bradley. Not all the way, but you get the point, right? There's an old saying in sales. What's the customer's favorite radio station? Anybody know what that is? It's WIIFM. What's in it for me? And if you can put what you do into that kind of language, and you do that by understanding all the things that you can do and putting that into value statements that I deliver to Nate, to Bradley, to Mark. Kara?
Yes.
Katie. Don't tell me. Yeah, tell me. Keegan. Keegan, thank you. That's the key to getting the conversation going. Is the start of that discussion is here's what you get from what I'm able to do for you, okay? All of that is what goes into answering that first question, who do I talk to? Because it's really tempting to think the world is my oyster and everybody's a prospect. Who can't use my service, right? I'm sure you've all heard terms like TAM, total addressable market. SAM, serviceable addressable market. SOM, serviceable obtainable market. I'm going to suggest that within that serviceable obtainable market, you need a beachhead. This is how you do it. Figure out where am I going to establish myself to get customers so I can even start to get some piece of that serviceable obtainable market. How are we doing? Good? Everybody good? Okay. Then the next question you got to say or answer is, so what do I say? This is all about messaging. I feel like I'm going behind that, I'm going to trip on that cord. So the whole idea about what you say starts here, but needs to get there or here, right? You got to write this stuff down. And the way I look at this is, even though it might be just you, start creating a sales playbook. Make sure that you are giving very careful thought to what it is that is going to be the motion that you take when you're trying to get new customers. And a sales playbook is kind of just what it sounds like. It says, okay, so how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? Right, you went through that value mapping exercise, right? You write all that stuff down, you got some good value statements. What do I do now? I start prospecting, right? And don't forget, this thing still works as a phone. And if you ask me, if I have to pick between trying to get somebody's attention in an email inbox or on that phone, I like my chances better there. I really do. And especially as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as somebody who's in charge of operations, it's wonderful to be able to pick up the phone, call Brian Slade when it's your prospect, and say, hi, this is Katie. I'm the CEO of, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Growing Wellness.
What is it?
Growing Wellness.
Growing
Wellness.
Growing Wellness. Already he's paying attention. Already he's paying attention because of who you are. Right? Next question becomes, well, maybe not. He made a face at me. He might not pay attention. You got to know what you're going to say. I put the word scripts in parentheses for a good reason. When people hear prospecting scripts, they think, oh, great. That's a great idea, Greg. I'm just going to read off a script when I make a phone call. And my answer to you is, yeah, maybe the first 5, 6, 10 times you will, but not after that. And more importantly, when you start to hire salespeople, it's important that they're on message. If you don't write the message out, trust me, us salespeople, we'll make it up, not a problem. That's a hard way to establish brand. It's a hard way to measure process. So a good sales playbook has scripts in it for how you want to start a conversation. And it's more than just what you say. More importantly, it's the questions that you ask. The qualifying questions to determine, is Brian worth my time? I gotta find out fairly quickly, is Brian a prospect? Does he fit the profile that I did in question 1? Is he in the right organization? Does he have the right kind of problems? Is he the right kind of buyer type? The wonderful news here is, unlike even just a few short years ago, you can find out a lot about Brian online before you reach out to him. You can get a sense as to, like, does this guy only buy from the big brands, or does he seem to be sending a message to the marketplace that he's looking for a competitive edge? He's looking for some advantage over his competitors that I can offer to him, because that's a great way to start that conversation. So the qualifying and discovery questions, really important. Write them out. You may not ask every one of them. You may not ask them in the same order every time, but make sure what you're doing is you're trying to make sure it's worth your time. Ask questions you need to have answered in order to know whether or not this is a good prospect for you or not. Sales playbooks can have lots of other things in it. If you're the only one doing sales, you know how to handle the objections, I'd say write them down anyway. Start writing them out. Keep a list so that when the next person comes on board to do sales, they'll know the kind of objections they're likely to hear. And it's great for cementing it in your head of how you're going to respond when you hear, ah, no, I got this already covered. When you're going to say, oh, thanks, Brian, bye. Or, is there another question you can ask? Things like assets and resources, again, important to just have a place that documents, here are the things I use at this point in the sales process when I'm prospecting. Here's my reference stories and case studies. Here's my tech documents. Here's my marketing collateral. Whatever it is that you have that's part of what you want to introduce into that sales process at the right time. Again, part of your sales playbook. And I put the last bullet in because I'm a big fan of this one. You might not role play with yourself. If somebody sees you talking in the mirror, they might throw a net over you, but role play, practice. I learned this from my own experience as a salesperson, but it was reinforced by my theater children. Both of my adult children are in theater. Scripts and role playing is how you put on a good show. If you're not practicing on your own, you're practicing in front of a customer, that's the wrong place to be practicing, right? And I'm not saying that the script and the message is exactly the same for every prospect. But once you've practiced it, it lives here, and you're comfortable with it. Thoughts? Questions? Bradley, looks like you've got a question. Break the ice, come on.
So, all right, when it comes to how you approach
like with your playbook, and making edits to, for example, like your script, are there certain things that you found that are easiest in terms of collecting data and feedback on? Obviously, objections are one thing, but if it's not a verbalized objection, if it's something where you're just not understanding why a script, one thing I've found is like a lot of companies that I've talked with, they kind of have their elevator pitch, but they don't know if their elevator pitch works. And so like, kind of like, when you're thinking of your playbook, how do you go about making edits to that if you're not necessarily getting the feedback on what edits to make?
So that's a great observation and a good question. It's hard to be able to make changes if you don't get a lot of feedback. If you're not having a lot of success with the messaging that you're using in your prospecting, change it. Try something else. Just don't be too eager to change it too quickly. You got to give these things a chance to tell you whether or not, if you think you've written the perfect opening sentence, even better, the perfect voicemail script that you want to leave for somebody. Remember, it's about what they're looking for, right? I know your prospect doesn't know you. You start ticking off features of your product or service in a voicemail to a stranger, they won't even get to the end of the message. Right? It's got to be about what's important to them, where the value is to them. You do that for 30 days and get no traction whatsoever, you might want to start thinking about changing it. A lot of that depends on how many prospecting calls you're making too, because if it's 2 a day, it's not much of a sample size, right? So considering the amount of trial and error is when you start to think about, what do I need to change up? And especially if it's not working out. But don't abandon it too early. And be consistent. Be consistent. Other questions before we move on? Yes?
What would you describe qualifying and discovery questions as? Or some examples?
What's your business? Make one up, yeah.
A couple different things. Photography, travel, and wholesale furniture.
Photography, travel, as an agent, travel agent,
Yes.
and furniture.
Yeah.
Okay. Which one do you want to do? Which one of those three? Furniture?
Yep.
Okay. Who's your prospect?
Like garden shops.
So this is outdoor furniture?
Yes.
Okay. And so the retailers are the retailers who have gardening, outdoor activity, pools, spas, things like that? Okay. All right. So what do you need to know? If I'm one of those people and you're calling me to try and start a conversation, what's one of the things you need to know if you think I could be a customer? Other than the fact I have a store you think that would work?
Do you have the space?
Okay, there's a qualifying question. What's another one?
What's your clientele like?
Beautiful, I love that.
Okay.
Is your furniture high-end?
It's Hollywood, so yeah.
Okay, so it's important for you to know, does Russack Lawn and Garden cater to wealthier clients or not, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
What else do you need to know?
I don't know.
But you see where this goes, right?
Yeah.
This is what that means, right?
Okay.
So you see me at my store as fitting the profile. As far as you can tell, I fit the profile of a potential customer.
Okay.
Right? Even better if you have customers that look like me already in terms of store size, number of stores, locations, product lines, those kinds of things, right?
Okay.
Qualifying questions are meant for you to get the answers to the questions that you need to know and that will resonate with me, right? So if you're asking me, what's the average household income of your average customer, might not be the first question you ask, I get it, right? But that's an important consideration and can lead to, oh, you know what? I've been working with Katie for 2 years. Her store has pretty much the same demographics. She's over in State College, though. And now I just made this connection. You just made that connection in my head. That you know how to talk to people like me. You are doing business with people like me, right? That's what qualifying and discovery questions do for you. But if you don't know what questions you want to ask, think about it, write them down, have them in front of you, on a screen, on paper, whatever, so that you don't forget to ask.
Hey Greg, for any of you that are selling to somebody who's going to sell to somebody else, one of the things I would recommend you really think about is not only what you need to sell it at to make your money, but then know what they're going to need to sell it at to make their money. So that's, they call it item markup and your margin percentage. So if you're reselling an item, you need, because that buyer, if they're going to make the decision on what furniture they're going to buy from you, or anything, even a service, if you're going to subcontract for somebody and then they're going to put you on top of that, what does it cost me to do business with you, and how much money can I make on your product? That's if it's more relevant to a product of a retail.
But that's a perfect example, thank you, Tom, of the kind of thinking that you should be doing before you decide to send that first email or make that first phone call to somebody you think looks like a prospect.
Okay.
Be ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome. As far as prospecting goes, this is a little bit, again, based on 35 years of experience. Start as high as makes sense, okay? You might not start with the chairman of the board of a company, but you might start with a COO or a CFO, especially if you're in a B2B kind of strategic marketplace. For you, maybe like executive director, somebody at the top of an organization. And I point this out because sometimes people are a little scared to do this. They think, you know what? Maybe I'm going to start with like the purchasing manager. Okay, if that's the highest the decision has to go in the organization you're selling to, maybe that's where you start. But even then, I would rather talk to somebody at the top of the organization, establish value, what I can do for you, how to measure that. Oh, and by the way, here are 2 or 3 other organizations I've done this with before. And they say, you know what? That sounds great. I'm gonna have you talk to Nate. He's the guy who will work with you to see if this will work for us. Because I got a connection. And I never let go of that. Never let go of that. We call that veto. Very important top officer. The book by Anthony Parinello, Selling to Veto. Again, another book that's 30 years old, still works. And you know what about that book I like? Letters. Letters that sound crazy. Sounds crazy. But think about how cluttered your inbox is. Think about how jammed up your voicemail can be. And now picture a letter that arrives in a number 10 envelope. Hand addressed with a stamp on it. Do you think that's going to get opened? I'll bet every dollar I have it will. Somebody will open that letter. And in that letter, you're going to say things like, in fact, I don't know if it's not in this presentation. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you about it really quickly. At the top of this letter is a quote from one of your customers, supporters, somebody by name, hopefully. Even if it has to be abbreviated Brian S. fine. But a quote that tells that recipient something about you. That's at the top of the letter. The next thing in that letter is, Dear Nate, we have been helping people like Brian, Bradley, and don't tell me, Keegan. So we're saying, we're dropping names right off the bat, right? Now, I'm not using job title names. I'm saying we're doing good work with people like Brian, Bradley, and Keegan, whatever their company names are, to deliver the following value. 3 bullet points with numbers on them. What have you done? Lowered operating expenses by 25%. Increased patient outcomes by 14%. I'm not sure what to do with the tree stand. It might come to me.
Minimized tree stand falls by 50%.
There you go. There you go. There you go. And why numbers are important is because that's what Vito's looking for. The headline's going to catch their attention. The bullets in the middle of that page is going to catch their attention. And the PS at the bottom is going to catch their attention. I'm going to come to that in a second. We got the 3 bullets of value. Measure, number. What's the next sentence? Can we do the same for you? I don't know. But a 20-minute conversation would be a good way for us to explore the possibilities together. Thanks very much for your time. Bradley. I forget who was sending the letter. I think it was Nate. P.S. I will call you on December 1st at 9 a.m. Please let me know if another day and time would work better for you. And you just made an appointment. Now you can't do this with every prospect. So why it's really important that when you think about who your best prospects are, back on question 1, industry segment, characteristics, buyer types, value mapping, pick the person that fits that profile the best and use that as a way to establish that you now own follow-up. That's on there. Yep, own follow-up. If you think a prospect is worth reaching out to personally, I think you should own follow-up. So even if I'm leaving a voicemail and I get my voicemail script out, which is basically a condensed version of this Vito letter, right? And I stay on message with that throughout any other communication. It's tempting to think about, what do I need to say this time? Say the same thing. Say the same thing you've been saying, as long as it's based on what value you have to deliver to somebody. And then end that letter and that email and that voicemail with ownership of the next step, the action item. You'll earn respect, or you'll get a return phone call from an assistant that says, Nate is really not interested. Would you please not bother him anymore? No problem. Okay, moving on. If you ask people to, I'm still leaving my phone number. They know how to get a hold of me if they want to. But I resist the temptation with the very best prospects to put the onus on them. Take the ownership of that follow-up. Okay. Lots of things we can say, but again, start high, speak your customer's language, meaning like if they use emojis, go ahead and use emojis. If they have a vocabulary in the industry, make sure you know what it is. But avoid too many abbreviations. I think at first that would be one bit of advice I would offer. They may or may not know them. Reference stories are the best. If you can start off that conversation saying, I've worked with organizations like A, B, and C. Even better if you've got a quote at the top of that video that comes from somebody in that industry. You're already borrowing credibility from your past customers, your past endeavors. Like I said, stay on message. Don't succumb to the temptation to think, what am I going to say this time? Say the same thing as long as it's based on what the customer is going to value. And the incredibly projected value takes us to big question number 3. Do a little bit of math. And again, this is not even math, this is like basic arithmetic. Okay? Figure out who it is that is at the center of what you do. Who's that community? And what are they doing that may or may not be at the source of the problem that you're going to solve. Okay? Put some math together and then figure out what it is that you're going to do differently for them that's going to create value. And here's what this could look like. Okay? I borrowed this from a past client. So it's a little out of date. I think you get more than 56 cents a mile, but you'll bear with me on this, right? You're a prospect. Who's going to be my prospect? Somebody be my prospect.
I'll be your prospect.
All right. So I am reaching out to you, and I figured that Nate, Bradley, Mark. Okay. Mark, I figure you got 100 salespeople or so in your organization. Is that about right?
100 salespeople in the organization? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you're going to answer yes for most of these, by the way. Okay.
Got it.
Otherwise, the exercise will fall apart. Bradley, Mark, based on my experience, salespeople tend to drive 200 miles average per week. Does that sound about right for your salespeople also?
Yes, sir.
So reimbursed at 56 cents a mile, which is now, I think it's like 64. But we'll go with 56. 50, what is it?
67.
67. Better update my slide. Gets even better that way. Mark, the math I run on that looks like about almost $600,000 a year that you are writing checks for your sales reps who report they're driving that mileage. That works for you, right? I mean, that's the math. Yeah? Well, I gotta tell you, companies like Bradley's and Nate's and Katie's, you think by now I know, right? Have reported, based on our travel and expense software, 20% reduction in reimbursed expenses because our software has GPS built into it. And now you don't rely on your sales reps to put a number in a spreadsheet. This software does it for you. That's going to put $116,000 a year back in your pocket. And the good news is our software is only $15,000 a year. Does this sound like a solution to a problem that you want to solve?
Yes, tell me more.
There we go. Very good. I'll take you with me on other.
I was going to ask you how much it costs per year first, but you already answered.
Yeah, so again, this is back at the cocktail napkin kind of math, right? But if I can start the conversation with you around reasonable assumptions on what the ROI is going to be, then you get to the payoff question, and it's almost like, unless Mark doesn't care about $116,000 a year, I assume we're going to have a longer conversation. So Mark, how do you come to the decision for applications and solutions like this in your organization?
How much time is it going to take to implement?
Okay, great question. Now we're doing discovery, right? In our playbooks, we were writing down qualifying questions, trying to figure out should Mark even be somebody I talk to. Now I'm working on discovery. How do you make these kind of decisions? He asks the question, how much time is it going to take? Now you're off to the races, right? Question? Oh, I love that skeptical look.
Well, I'm curious, how do you deal with this when it's more of a service-based business rather than a product?
A service-based business?
Yeah, like a consulting service, for example.
Okay.
How I'm just kind of setting this up.
Anybody else want to take a crack at this? How are we going to do this? How does your customer value what you do?
It's customizable, it's unique, it's something that is conveniently located to where they are.
Okay. Can you start to put some kind of dollar signs on that? Here's why I ask that question. If there's one common denominator, I don't care what business you're in, it's money. So if you can dollarize what you do, then instead of selling software, you're selling custom solutions that solve some kind of a problem. Right? Maybe that problem doesn't necessarily reduce expense, maybe it increases revenue. But I like your chances a lot more if you can put a dollar sign around one of those or both of those things for somebody who ultimately is going to have to make an economic decision.
We've shown that employees produce.
Well, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm just saying, like, we've shown that employees produce X amount better, or whatever, act X amount better.
They're more efficient, more productive?
Thank you. By being relaxed and having a happy workplace. Let me help you.
I bet it also has a positive effect on retention.
Oh yeah.
All these things can be dollarized. If I can make you happier with this job that you do, and you become a more loyal and productive employee, and I can simply project it, we'll get 2 hours more a month of productivity out of Katie than we did before. I pay you a salary, you make some amount of money. If you're in a revenue affecting kind of a role that now can equate to increased revenues, I'm going to go ahead and make that argument too. And oh, by the way, she's going to stay on the team 3 years longer. Do you know how much it costs to recruit and hire people? Turnover is a big deal. You started to put dollar signs around this, and you know what? I worked for a sales manager years ago because I was an engineer converting to sales. And I asked the question the same kind of way. It's like, how are we going to do this? He said, Greg, all you need to do is pick a fight. Meaning, one of the best questions you can get back when you're projecting this value is, where the hell did you get that number? You know why? Because they're thinking about it. So you got to really figure out how you're going to put a dollar sign. Yes?
I was going to talk to team building. If you did like team building research shows that employees improve this and whatever, would be an easy way for you
Absolutely.
to do it, because it's going to be hard for you to find research based on your business alone, but team building as an umbrella.
At first it can feel like it's going to be hard. How am I going to put dollar signs around things? Until you step back and you say, what's the impact that that thing, that service, my expertise, the piece of furniture, whatever it is, what does it end up creating that the CFO would be interested in? Right? I love that part. Let's keep doing that. Let's keep doing that. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. So, these things all combine to create a list of questions you got to ask yourself. These might not be exactly the questions you ask yourself, but you can see how they now relate to the who, what, and why. Okay? So if I'm going to create a sales process for a new business, I need to know, who am I going to talk to? Who's my ideal customer profile? How do they make decisions? How long do sales take? And what's the means by which I'm creating opportunities? I'm sorry, I left abbreviations. Anybody, MQL? Marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead. Terms made popular by HubSpot, actually, I think. And all this says to you is, I've got to think about not just who do I talk to, what do I say, and why should they care, but how am I going to take that now and create some kind of a process out of it in which I can turn prospecting, qualifying, discovery, and decision-making into something that is measurable, is trackable, is teachable to the next salesperson that you hire. Questions? Here's what one looks like. This is actually a sales process that I have used in various flavors in many places in my career with many clients. The important thing to take away from here isn't so much what's phase 1 called, phase 2, or phase 3 called. It's the fact that you've got different phases for how your customers make decisions, not how you sell. And over time, what you'll understand, you gotta start somewhere. You can start with 10, 25, 50, 75, 90, 100%, right? So if a deal meets the criteria, it's completed this phase. You might have some of the things you need to know over here, but if you don't have all the things you need to know over here, the deal doesn't move forward. It's kind of that simple. It's a checklist for how your prospects make decisions and how you need to do good discovery and qualification. And at that point then, you have a process that lets you create forecasts that aren't based on gut feelings, emotions, wet fingers in the wind. It is simply now a matter of, you can go to an investor and say, here's how we've tracked our deal flow. Here's how much of a weighted forecast we have. $1 million in phase 1 is only $100,000. It's not $1 million. Because you expect that only 10% of that is actually going to get to 100%. We good? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Good,
My pleasure.
see it structured like this. It's good to see it outlined and structured like this. I see
Yeah.
examples of people doing it and not even realizing they were doing it, or having like an actual process behind it. But to have it like laid out, step 1 through 3, like you have here, see a lot of value to it.
Thank you, because this isn't magic bullet stuff. I'm not like some sage that came off a mountain and created this. This is very much, when you step back and look at it, it's like, damn, makes a lot of sense. It's kind of common sense almost. But if you don't invest the time and energy to establish whatever the process is going to be for your organization, it's hard to start measuring where you're at and where you're going if you don't have something that says, this is how we do it. And yeah, it's not chiseled in granite. You get to change it. You get to learn from it, and you should. But again, one of the things I really emphasize, especially with like hardcore salespeople, especially, it's not on you to figure out what the next thing to say to somebody is to get them to respond, because they don't remember what you said the last time. They don't remember what you put in the last email. They may have paid some attention to your PDF, but it's been a while since they looked at it. Consistency in messaging value is what's worked for me. And I think it will work for you too.
Go and put a playbook together.